In this episode, we are going to talk about Trotsky's struggle against the bureaucratization of the Soviet state and about the origin of this phenomenon, which is Stalinism. After the Civil War, the first symptoms of the bureaucratization of the Soviet state began, and that will result as a product in Stalinism, which was always identified by the world bourgeoisie as being the inevitable product of the Russian Revolution. But we have to investigate then what Stalinism was and what it produced. Was Stalinism itself an inevitable product of the Russian Revolution? Trotsky was the one who best explained this phenomenon and also the one who best fought against it. What did Trotsky say about bureaucratization? He explained that the phenomenon of bureaucratization in the Soviet Union came from situations in the international and national fields. Both the international situation and the situation of the Soviet state had changed. The revolutionary tide that lasted from 1918 to 1921 had ended in the defeats of revolutions in Germany, Hungary, Italy, and other European countries. The Soviet Union was isolated, a worker state besieged by totally hostile imperialist powers. If there had been a victorious revolution in Germany, for example, that would have completely changed that situation. We would have cooperation between Germany, a much more developed state, and the Soviet worker state. Possibly this phenomenon of bureaucratization would not have happened. As we saw in the previous episode on the way of life, the Soviet Union was a tremendously backward country culturally and needed specialized personnel to run the economy of the country. We're talking about engineers, doctors, teachers, technicians. These staffs were completely absent. It is therefore necessary to look for all this technical staff among the former civil employees of the Russian Empire. On the other hand, the need to reorganize the economy of the country led the Soviet government to temporarily allow the development of a market economy. The free marketing of agricultural surplus, the activities of small businesses and small industries were allowed. And this was called New Economic Policy, or NEP. The technicians, the officials of the old regime, and also those individuals who got rich under the NEP, who were called netmen, immediately sought political representation. And the only possibility of political representation was to participate within the Bolshevik Party, which was the only existing party. The right wing, the reformists and the Stalinists say that what the Bolsheviks wanted from the beginning was a single party. Nothing could be more false. This is stupidity and a slander. The history is quite different. After October 1917, the Mensheviks, the Revolutionary Socialists, and other political groups participated in the Soviets, had their legal newspapers, and acted politically in legality. However, a few months after October, the left socialist revolutionaries, dissatisfied with the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, attempted a coup against the Bolshevik government and made an attempt on Lenin's life. Worse, during the Civil War, most of the right-wing revolutionary socialists and Mensheviks joined the White Armies and took up arms against the Bolshevik government. In this situation, it was impossible to maintain the legality of those parties. In this context of civil war, destruction, economic crisis, hardship, poverty, cultural and technological backwardness, a bureaucracy arose out of the need to establish order to distribute the minimal wealth that existed. However, This bureaucracy immediately began to take advantage of the situation, creating its own privileges and appropriating part of the country's income. The opportunists, the careerists, the functionaries of the old regime of the Russian Empire, and those who had enriched themselves with the NEP, looked among the lower cadres of the Bolshevik Party, amongst the lower leaders, for someone to lead them. And they found that figure in Stalin, who had two qualities, in inverted commas. He was the General Secretary and he mastered the party machine. To confront this bureaucracy, it was necessary to have a very active working class. However, a large part of the most militant workers had died in the Civil War, more than 1 million of them. And the working class, already in 1920 to 21, was another working class made up of peasants who had recently come to the city. But linked to that, and perhaps the most important reason, there was a decline in the internal life of the party. Because of the serious situation in the country, which demanded a maximum of discipline and unity, the Bolshevik leaders had to temporarily ban the existence of factions and tendencies within the party. This was seen by all as a momentary situation. But it was later used by the bureaucratic leaders who took over the party leadership to put an end to party democracy. Trotsky's conclusion, then, was that the phenomenon of bureaucratization was an objective, social and economic phenomenon. It was the result of the international isolation of the Soviet Union, the economic destruction caused by the Civil War, and the technological and cultural backwardness that allowed that bureaucracy to take over the Soviet state. But in reality, it was not Trotsky but Lenin who was the first to warn about bureaucratization and to take measures against that process. Lenin proposed and set up a specific state organ to combat bureaucratization. It was called the Workers' and Peasants' Inspection. However, the head of this body was Stalin, and logically this fight failed. Lenin also tried to purge all the careerists who joined the Bolshevik Party. He coined a famous phrase in which he said, "Better fewer, but better." He also sought to confront Stalin's position in relation to the nationalities of the former Russian Empire, such as Georgia, which was basically a position that did not respect the self-determination of those nations, in other words, the same oppressive position as Tsarism. That battle of Lenin was weakened because he fell ill in May 1922 and was immediately replaced by a troika, a so-called troika, a triumvirate of party leaders, Zinoviev, Kamenev and Stalin. Zinoviev and Kamenev were from that sector which had opposed the seizure of power in October.
But they were already something else then?
Yes, but afterwards they were, let's say, pardoned because they took part in the Civil War. They took part
centralised.
Yes, but they have always had an opportunistic position. To get an idea, they committed almost treason. Lenin called for their expulsion from the party, once because they denounced the organisation of the October insurrection, and once because they resigned from the Soviet government. They were people's commissars in the Soviet government, and they resigned, several leaders, the two of them, Nogin and several others, and that was considered a betrayal. In the midst of the confusion of the first days of the revolution, these mates resigned. Then they were disciplined, but eventually they made that alliance with Stalin. And then they blew up because Stalin did a sweep kick on them. You see? Despite the illness, Lenin continued his battle. He proposed an alliance to Trotsky to confront the bureaucratic wing of the party, led by Stalin. Finally, Lenin, in his will, recommended that Stalin be removed from the post of General Secretary of the party. But the bureaucracy, already totally dominating the party apparatus, kept Lenin's will hidden, not only from public opinion, but even from the whole party. Lenin could not oppose this because he entered the final stage of his illness. had a new stroke and died in January 1924. There are sectors that believe he was, and others that he wasn't, that Stalin had been an agent of the Tsar's secret service of the Okhrana, and that was denounced. Some people say the files found, not after the Okhrana archives were opened, that he was a collaborator of the Okhrana well before the Russian Revolution. So he would be for a period like a double agent. We saw Trotsky's explanation for the phenomenon of the bureaucratization of the Soviet state and the origin of Stalinism. Now let us see how he fought back Stalinism. In 1923, inspired by Trotsky, there emerged what would later become the left opposition within the Communist Party. Its launching manifesto was the Declaration of 46, so called because it brought together 46 important leaders of the Communist Party. Its platform had two main points. The first was a critique of the way the new economic policy was being conducted, warning that it favoured the strengthening of the rich peasants. In contrast, the left opposition called for a planned policy of industrialisation of the country. The other, even more important point, was the restoration of freedom of criticism within the party. Between 1923 and 1927, the left opposition fought the bureaucracy within the party. Nevertheless, it was severely repressed and forced to work underground. Thousands of its members were expelled from the party and deported to Siberia. The power of the bureaucracy grew in those years, and with it the power of Stalin. Stalin manoeuvred using the party apparatus with alliances that attacked the sector that most threatened his power. First, he allied with Zinoviev and Kamenev to attack and destroy the left opposition led by Trotsky. Then he discarded Zinoviev and Kamenev and allied himself with Bukharin, Rykov and Tomsky, who were the leaders of the right wing of the party. Finally, he discarded these three and became the centre of Soviet power, of the Soviet bureaucracy. Thus was born the bureaucratic apparatus that we call Stalinism. Trotsky was gradually removed from his functions in the Soviet state, first from the War Commissariat, then from the party secretariat, from its central committee, and eventually he was expelled and deported to Siberia in 1927. Then, in 1929, he was expelled from the Soviet Union and deported to Turkey. The next episode will be a fortnight from now, and in it we'll deal with the main polemics between Trotskyism and Stalinism during those years. Mainly the polemic about socialism in one country and the theory of permanent revolution elaborated by Trotsky.